In this video, I'm going to show you how I took this kind of plain, boring wall in my house and spiced it up a little bit by making an accent wall. I concentrated on 4 key ideas. The first being to choose a design that would match with the rest of my decor, but also choose something that I was capable of accomplishing with my skills and my tools, and something that was within my budget. For example, I really like circles and curves. I've got them all over my house, but there's no way that I could construct a project like this. I just don't have, a scroll saw or a jigsaw or anything that would help me cut curves. So it had to be an accent wall that used straight lines and just maybe 30, 45 degree angle type cuts, things that were easy to do. If you Google accent walls or get on Pinterest and just start browsing, there are so many designs that can help you get started and help you choose what you like. And eventually I settled on this chevron design. It kind of reminded me of mountains a little bit, and I sort of like the look of it. Plus, with this design, I didn't need a whole lot of material in order to complete the look of it, and so it was within my budget as well. So after choosing a design that I liked and that I thought I could manage, the next thing I did was choose the wood that I was going to work with for this project. I decided right away that I didn't want to use regular pieces of lumber. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that I didn't want any of the wood grain to show through when I was done with my accent wall. You would have to paint many, many coats on a piece of wood in order to get rid of all of the grain, not to mention all of the sanding work that goes into it to smooth these boards out. So I just really didn't want to mess with that. Another option that I did not end up choosing is a piece of lumber that has already been treated and sanded and painted, so all the work has been done for you. But I didn't end up choosing this type of material because wood is pretty unforgiving. It's pretty stiff, and if your walls aren't perfectly straight, sometimes it's hard to sort of bend a board so that it conforms with your walls. Also, boards can warp a little bit and have bows in them, which just sort of increases the difficulty to work with it on a project like this. What I ended up choosing instead was MDF board. This board is an actual trim board, and it's designed to be flexible. If there are any imperfections in your wall, the board just kind of moves around them. So it's pretty easy to work with, it's flexible, and it's already ready to go. You don't have to sand it, you don't have to paint. MDF board is great to work with for a project like this. One final consideration of mine was the size of the boards that I wanted to use. I didn't want something thin that was sort of barely noticeable. I wanted a substantial accent wall that would throw some shadows around when the light started to hit it. So I chose something, a little wider and a little thicker in the hopes that it would just be a little bit more prominent in the room. The next thing I want to talk about is why I didn't choose to take the accent wall all the way to the corners, right up to the ceiling, the walls, and the floor. Instead of taking my accent wall all the way to the edges, I made kind of like a picture frame and inset it about 6 inches all the way around. And there are a couple of reasons why I chose to do this. First is that my walls aren't perfectly straight. There's a bit of curve in those corners, and I didn't want to deal with any weird gaps that might happen between the wood and the walls. The second reason is that when I was looking through Pinterest trying to get some ideas for what design I might want, I noticed in some of the pictures that I saw that there was this weird sort of kind of awkward thing happening when the accent wall would join up with the baseboards. So I decided that a picture frame sort of idea would alleviate that issue. And I decided to go 6 inches in on all sides because I had a light switch that was in the way. If I decided to move my inset so that I got past the light switch, it would have ended up being about 15 inches all the way around, and in my mind that was just too much. So I decided on 6 inches inset all the way around and made a little frame around the light switch that I think got incorporated pretty well into the overall design. And the last kind of big driving force for my design idea was symmetry. I love symmetry. I need it. I'm a math teacher. My brain has trouble with asymmetrical designs. I always try to look for patterns in chaos. Like, I need symmetry. So I knew that I was gonna need like a mountain peak right in the middle, and that the left side was gonna have to exactly mimic the right side. I also wanted the bottom row of this chevron design to be exactly the same distance away from the frame as the top. In constructing this project, the top and the bottom rows were the first ones that I measured and installed. Then I just measured the distance between those top and bottom rows and divided that measurement into 3 equal spaces so that I could figure out exactly where to place the remaining 2 rows. And then once you're done figuring out what kind of design you want for your accent wall, then it's time to construct this thing. Here is the list of materials and tools that I used to help me complete this project. All right, so the first thing you're gonna wanna get started with is prepping your walls. This involves a number of things. You're gonna want to remove any electrical faceplates that might get in your way. I like to store all of these pieces along with any of their screws in plastic bags. It just helps me avoid losing things when I need to put them back eventually. I'll also look for any nails or screws that need to be removed from the wall. And while you're doing this, also look for any damage to the wall, any scratches or anything like that that also needs to be repaired. Just grab yourself some wall putty and a putty knife and start filling in any of those damaged parts that you found. Once it's dry, you're gonna take a wall sanding block and smooth it out. You can always reapply the wall putty as many times as you need to fix whatever damage that you're working on. When you're done though, the last thing I usually do is apply some wall texturizer just so that everything blends in well, and once it's painted, you'll never be able to tell that you fixed any damage at all. Everything blends in nice and smooth. All right, now we're ready to start building this thing. So one of my design ideas was to sort of inset this accent wall 6 inches all the way around so that it looked more like a picture frame instead of taking it all the way to the edges of the wall, ceiling, and the floor. So grab your tape measure and a pencil and start marking 6 inches all the way around from all of the edges on this wall. I made a little template of the accent wall just to help me better demonstrate which step I'm on, which board I'm placing at the moment. And the very first board that I'm gonna work on is establishing the frame, and we're gonna work from the bottom to the top. So we need to measure the length of this board. To do this, I just measured the length of the entire wall, and then remember that the inset is 6 inches on both sides. So I'm gonna subtract 12 inches from that total measurement to find out what length I need for this board. Now we're ready to cut that first piece and get it up on the wall. Anytime I work with a new piece of wood, I'll make a really small cut at the very end just to make sure that the board is nice and smooth and straight when I work with it. So grab your measuring tape and cut this thing to size. And now we're ready to install this board. To make this process easier for me, I cut a couple of pieces of scrap wood at 6 inches just so that I could elevate that board without having to hold it in place. To secure all of these boards in place, I'm just using a nail gun with some 2-inch finishing nails. I know there are a lot of videos online and you see people using glue and gluing it to the wall, but if you ever need to remove your accent wall, say you need to repair a piece of it or I don't know, any reason at all, you're gonna find that if you glue it to the wall, you're gonna cause a lot of damage when you remove it. So it's just my choice not to do that. Just finishing nails is all I use to secure it. But you do want to add as much support as you can. So I'm using my stud finder to locate the 2x4 behind the wall. And I'm making sure that I nail into those areas just to support the board as much as possible. With one board in place, now we go back to the template. And the next boards I'm going to install are going to be the left and right pieces of the frame. To get this measurement, you're going to take your tape measure and measure vertically from the floor to the ceiling. Then you're going to subtract off the 6-inch inset from both the top and the bottom, so that'll be 12 inches. Then you also have to subtract the width of the 2 boards that make up the top and bottom pieces of the frame. So for me, each board is 2.5 inches, so it'd be a total of 5 inches. And the resulting number that you get is the length that you're going to cut your board to. Mine is 91 inches. So grab your measuring tape and cut those boards to size. The left side of my frame was quite a bit easier to install than the right side, so I'm going to start there and show you that one first. Place the board right on top of that bottom piece. Line it up with your 6-inch marks. And then I just used a level to check and make sure that the board was straight as I used my nail gun and secured it to the wall. There is no stud behind these vertical pieces on the left and right side, so no need to break out the stud finder for these pieces. I also encourage you to use a square and make sure that that corner ended up at a 90-degree angle. The right side of the frame is quite a bit more difficult for me because there was a light switch in the way. If you don't have an obstruction that you need to work around, then feel free to skip this part of the video, but I think it's a great opportunity to show you how to work around these pieces and how I accommodated this light switch. So the first thing I'm doing is placing this board straight on top of the bottom piece so that I can get an accurate placement for my measurements around this light switch plate. So I'm just marking the top and bottom of the plate onto the board. The next thing I'm gonna measure is from my 6-inch marking directly to the light switch. This ends up being about 1.5 inches for me. And then I'm gonna take this 1.5 inch measurement and I'm gonna transfer it onto the board. Make sure that you mark this 1.5 inch measurement on both the top and the bottom of the light switch markings that you already made. And then I'm just grabbing a straight edge so that I can draw a straight line connecting these 2 measurements. And then use that straight edge again to draw a box so that you've connected your top and bottom measurements of the light switch. The next thing to do is cut out that little box that you made. There are lots of ways that you could do this. I started mine with a hacksaw and then finished with the circular saw blade attachment on my Dremel tool. Just remember, it doesn't have to look beautiful because the faceplate on the light switch is going to cover this up anyway. So no worries if you've got some jaggedy looking edges going on. You can use some sandpaper to try to clean those up if you need to. Now I'm finally ready to install this thing. Make sure that you rest this board directly on top of the horizontal board, the first board that we installed. And then just use your 6-inch marks and your level to make sure that the board is straight and secure it to the wall with your nail gun and your finishing nails. Okay, back to the template. This is what we have installed so far. And the next thing we're gonna do is place the center board. To get this guy lined up in the right spot, you'll need to take the width of the wall and then just divide that measurement by 2. That way you'll know where the halfway mark is. You'll also need to mark the halfway distance on the board that you're going to install as well. I found mine by taking the width of the board, which was 2.5 inches, dividing it by 2, and coming up with 1.25 or 1 1/4 inches. Line up those marks with each other, use a level to make sure that your board is straight, and then secure it in place with your nail gun. Back to the template again. Here's what we've installed so far, and next we're going to install the rest of those vertical pieces. Finding the measurement of the spacing of these boards is a little bit more difficult, so I'm just going to walk you through real quick how I found these numbers. So first you're going to measure the distance between the center board and an outside frame board. Make sure that your tape measure stays on the inside of this space. You don't want to include the widths of either boards in your measurement. My measurement ended up being 60.25 inches. This measurement should be exactly the same from the center board to the right side or from the center board to the left side. They should match. The next thing you're gonna do is subtract the width of the boards that you want to place in this space. So if I want 2 boards, I'm gonna subtract off 5 inches. Then because those 2 boards are gonna divide up that space into 3 equal sized spaces, we're gonna take that number and divide it by 3. And this number represents the space between each board. So mine is approximately just slightly under 18.5 inches. So you're gonna grab your tape measure, measure that distance that you found, maybe start on the left side and work your way across, and keep measuring that same distance between boards all the way across the wall. Use your level to make sure that the boards are straight and secure it to the wall with a nail gun. Remember that you can use a square to ensure that you've got 90-degree angles in those corners. Back to the template again. Here's what we've installed so far. And the next thing we're gonna do is put on the top piece to finish the frame. So I'm gonna caution you a little bit when you measure this board. I would not assume that it's going to be the exact same length as the board at the bottom. So I have a length of board that's slightly more than what I need, and I'm putting it in place so that I can get an accurate measure of how much I really need in order to complete this accent wall frame. Even though that board measured 128 inches for me, the board that I need to install next at the top is not guaranteed to have that same exact measurement. And the reason why is because my walls are not perfectly straight. I'm making my marking and then I'm gonna go cut this thing to size. It ended up being about 128.25 inches instead of 128 inches. So it's a good thing just to place the board and see exactly what you need before you make any cuts. Make your cut and then install that board using your nail gun and stud finder. All right, so back to the template. Here's what we've installed so far. And the next thing I'm gonna start working on is those little diagonal pieces. I'm gonna start at the bottom. I decided to cut these pieces at a 30-degree angle, and each of these pieces averages about 21.5 inches, but I encourage you to measure each piece individually just to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need in each space. And I'll show you how I measured each one right now. To cut your boards, swivel your miter saw to a 30-degree angle cut and lock it in place. Cut just a little bit off the end of your board. Take that board back to your accent wall and place that 30-degree angle cut that you just made so that its corner lies flush with one of the vertical pieces and the bottom frame piece. Make a mark on this 30-degree board where it lies flush with the next vertical piece. Make sure to mark this on both the bottom and the top. Now I'm just using a square to help me extend both of those markings, just so that I can see them both a little bit better on the front side of the board. And then I'm going to use a square to help me connect those two markings together. It should form a diagonal line, and if you did a decent job, this should be right around 30 degrees. Use your miter saw to cut this board along that angle that you just marked. Be sure to keep your saw at the 30-degree angle. Then bring your board back to the wall, make sure it fits, and tape it in place until you're ready to secure it with your nail gun. You're going to repeat this process as many times as you need until you fill up that entire bottom portion of diagonal pieces. I would also caution you to check and make sure as you go that each of the peaks comes together at the same height, just to make sure that everything visually is going to look good for the finished product. And then make your markings and repeat the process for cutting each of these boards. Then when you're ready, you're going to secure each of those boards in place with your nail gun. While you're doing this, remember that these boards will cut across a space that have some 2x4 studs behind them, and these should already be marked for you on that bottom board, that bottom frame piece. So when you see me kind of touch the bottom board and then move up, that's just me finding the 2x4 stud behind the wall so that I can secure it a little better in place. I am gonna leave the last two boards unsecured for now. The reason why is because of the electrical box that's kind of in the way. So I'll show you how I worked around that problem when I get to step 5, but for now I'm just gonna leave those boards alone. So back to the template. Here's what we've installed so far, and we're gonna install the top row of diagonal pieces next. You're gonna follow the exact same process as you did for the bottom row of those diagonal pieces. I just want to remind you though that you can always check with a tape measure or a level just to make certain that those peaks are, well, I guess in this case valleys, that those valleys are coming together at the same height. And then when you're ready, secure these boards in place with your nail gun. Don't forget to check for the 2x4 studs behind the wall to give you some extra security. Okay, so here's what we have so far. And to finish up this step, we just need to add in those 2 extra rows of diagonal pieces. And now I'll walk you through the steps of how I got the spacing for those 2 rows. First, you're gonna need to measure the entire distance between the top and bottom rows. I ended up with a measurement of 74 inches. Then you're gonna need to subtract the width of the 2 rows that you want to place. Each board has a width of 2.5 inches, but when you take into account that you're cutting it on a 30-degree diagonal, the width of the board increases. So this new measurement was approximately 3 inches per board, and since there's 2 of them, I subtracted 6 inches from that measurement. Those 2 rows are going to divide up the space into 3 equal-sized areas, so you need to divide that new number by 3. So my spacing between each row ended up being just shy of 23 inches. You're gonna follow the same steps as before. Measure out your spacing, cut your boards at those 30-degree angles, measure each board individually so that you get proper spacing, and then secure it in place with your nail gun. At this point, your wall should be fully installed unless if you have any pesky little electrical boxes in your way. And in the next step, step 5, I'm gonna show you how I dealt with those. First, you need to unscrew the plug-in so that it sticks out from the wall. The reason for this is that you need to be able to get the board to slide into place between the plug and the wall. And then mark on that board where the end of the electrical box is. And then you're gonna do the same thing for a bottom piece. Use your miter saw to cut the boards at a 45-degree angle at your markings. And then you're gonna tighten up the screw that holds the plug-in in place. The board should not move around after you do this. Then do the same thing for the top piece. Then grab another board to finish out this frame and mark the distance between the top and bottom pieces. This piece also needs to be cut at 45-degree angles at these markings that you just made. Put the board in place and then secure everything with your nail gun. Don't worry if it looks kind of messy. You can always clean things up and make it look nice and professional looking with some wood filler and some caulk. Okay, now another issue that I had, aside from framing out this electrical box, is that one of my diagonal pieces cuts through the box. So I needed a solution for that problem as well. So I take the board that I've originally cut for this space and line it up where it would go if that electrical box wasn't in the way. And then use my pencil to make markings at where the board hits the electrical box frame that I just made. Remember, this angle should be cut at 30 degrees, not 45 degrees. But when you're done, put that board in place and secure it with your nail gun. And there's one more tiny thing to finish up this spot. I need a really tiny board cut at a 30-degree angle to fit in that corner between the frame of the electrical box and that bottom frame board. So I'm gonna use the remnants of that original board to cut out a tiny little corner piece. I'm just marking where the board starts and ends up against the electrical box frame. And then I'm going to take my square and draw a straight line connecting those two markings. Once you get that little guy cut, put it in place and secure it with your nail gun. I use the same method to create a 45-degree frame for both my electrical outlet and my light switch. So this is what we have so far, and now your job is to make it look pretty. We are gonna go from this to this using wood filler, caulk, and paint. To fill in the nail holes and any gaps between boards, I used this oil-based wood putty. It never hardens, so you don't have to sand this. It's a really smooth finish. You just apply it with a putty knife and scrape off any excess to make it nice and smooth. Apparently my camera was not recording when I applied this wood putty, and I'm sorry about that, but I have no video to show you. But basically just at every single joint where the boards come together, you want to fill that in with this wood putty to make it nice and smooth, and then you won't be able to see the transitions between the boards very well. You're also going to use that wood putty to fill in every nail hole that you made. You're also going to need to use caulk to secure the seams between the boards and the wall. Make sure that you have a bowl of water handy and a lot of paper towels. Run a bead of caulk all the way around each area in the seam between the wall and the board. The next thing you're going to need to do is smooth this out. You're going to dip your finger in your bowl of water. Make sure that your finger is constantly wet. If it dries out, it's going to leave weird impressions in the caulk. And you're just going to take your finger and you're going to smooth it out and work your way all the way around the edges of that area. And then you're just going to repeat yourself over and over again until you seal up every single area of this accent wall. Finishing this job up is the most time-consuming part of the entire project. It's awful. So turn on some music, listen to an audiobook, and just get into a rhythm and get this thing done. Because once you are done with that, all you have left to do is paint, and then this project is finished. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you.